Talking about a drive-in, you know, doing things in a drive-in.
Sitting on the cannons at Fort Leavenworth as a kid.
My Twitch
Personally,
is
goats
that
are
on
okay.
How are you? Louis Clem. At the International Officers Welcome. I know that you were at the commission meeting. You should come down there and cover that one. That was another story in itself there.
People were looking kind of confused at the internationals when they were listening to
They
it.
asked
Like,
me, who is that guy? Don't worry about it.
somebody walked in off the street.
It's kind of hard to explain, but you have to really experience it.
That's good point. I like that.
Ready?
Yes.
Yeah. Ready?
Yes.
Good evening. Welcome to the July 17th study session. I ask that everyone either turn off their phone or silence them. And we have 3 items on the agenda. First item is the Festival Advisory Committee recommendations.
And Taylor Tedder, Assistant City Manager, has been the city's point person on this board, so he'll talk about what they've been doing.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. As you know, you authorized the temporary formation of the Festival Advisory Board in late 2017, and it consisted of various community members. They met in December, January, and February and looked back on the history of the festivals and events in Leavenworth, feasibility of funding, who the lead organization could be, partnerships with businesses, community members. After the initial feedback from the commission study session on May 15th, the board met again on June 28th to further refine their recommendations. So those recommendations are as follows. We looked at where the festival could be held, and they really feel strongly that east of 4th Street, incorporating Landing Park, the community center, the Home 2 Suites, city-owned parking lots, and then creating an entrance at the Riverwalk trail area. They believe a theme of First City Festival with a historic Wild West type theme would be best, playing off of our history. They really want it to kind of be based off of us being the gateway to the West and incorporate Buffalo Bill and all kinds of things related to that. Mid-September was identified as the date. They really think that the 3rd weekend of September would be ideal. And then we went through some other responsibilities that the city would have for this festival. That would be including but not limited to marketing, organization of some type of craft fair at the community center, organization of food trucks and vendors, other vendors, and involving civic organizations as well. They want to have a kids area and a parking lot with activities. Another big thing would be live entertainment. They mentioned everything from the Army Band and chorus to Melissa Etheridge and others that might want to come to town and be involved with that. We would be responsible for recruitment of other outside organizations and sponsors for assistance. We'd have to provide electric services at various locations. They would love a kiddie parade for children on the Saturday morning. And then fireworks show was mentioned for the Saturday night. That would be a great way to end the event. So they were looking at it being just a Friday, Saturday. And we have Christy Lee here, the other advisory board members other than Ms. Bowder couldn't attend. But really the next steps would be a consensus of this general plan, and staff would move forward with the coordination and planning so that we could do a successful event in 2019.
We didn't put this on this list, but also the city would be responsible for cleanup and security too.
Yeah.
And probably a lot of other things too, but
yeah.
I can't think of right now. But
we really just kind of outlined that broad area, and I think there would be a few more things, definitely, but we try to get as much help from all the partners and organizations.
Right. Mr. Mayor, you had asked about if the direction was to go east of 4th Street and use Landing Park, how did the police chief feel and fire chief feel about safety? in the course of, and I did have a chance to talk to the police chief today, and he's got some ideas, and he essentially said that would not be a hurdle. We'd figure it out, whether that's having, since it is our festival, having officers down there as part of the interaction, but then also watching it, maybe setting up some barriers, but it's not an issue as far as he's concerned.
Okay. That was my only concern.
Yeah.
Police chief and fire chief have vetted it, I'm fine with all the recommendations. Any other questions or comments from
Yeah,
commissioners?
do you guys have any thoughts on
I've got
what we've been talking about?
one, and it might be my misinterpretation of it, because I know I wasn't here for all these meetings that we've had on it, just the last one, I believe. But my thought was that this was a community operation, not a department head, because that's what it's gonna turn out, is that we'll have to put Taylor in charge of this.
So, not necessarily.
And with all the responsibilities that the city has, and some of these I can see, I don't see all of them.
So if the commission likes the general idea of the theme, of the attractions, of the date, of the time, of the location, then what I'll do is assess with Taylor, with some of our other department heads, how much work's involved.
Right.
We could look at a contract employee or a contractor to a festival advisor. There's professionals that do that. We could look at partnerships with organizations, with the city as a funding partner, but this would not fall to Taylor. This would not fall to the Parks and Rec director. This would definitely be something beyond what we have right now, and until we know what it is we're doing, then we'll assess that. But I'm confident that we can get it done, whether we hire somebody or do it in-house.
It would take a person to coordinate all these things, it has to,
Right.
because you can't, you can't, and it takes some time to do it, definitely.
Well, and
Yeah,
I understand,
big
I support a festival by all means. I like the other ones that we used to have, and one on Delaware between, what they block off Second or from First clear down to
Yeah.
Fifth
One
or
thing we
Fourth.
really didn't want to do is cross Fourth Street.
Well, I
I
understand
didn't
that.
like it when I was there because it was so dangerous.
And with the additional truck traffic that we have, I fully understand that, but I just didn't want this thing to turn into a city festival where every year we've got to take charge of this. Because I want the community involved in it, because when we did it before, everybody was out there, well, we need to do this, because there's so many different ideas out there. And I don't think you can stay on one line item for every year that you do it. I can see it for a year or two, like the Western one, but I think to keep the interest up, you need to change, change all. So, anyways, that's just my thoughts on it, so.
And I think it would be an ever-changing type of event
Right.
with different activities, different days, different.
Maybe some different sub-themes or something for a
Yeah.
particular year or something like that.
It's just to get it
We
started.
do after actions after the first year
Yeah.
and see what we liked, what we didn't like.
Right.
And with the flexibility of the CVB staff and other options that we'd have with it, contracting with someone that does this professionally across the nation or something like that, we could definitely minimize staff time.
Well, and that was one thing too, that when we were doing the Lewis and Clark event, and we looked at what Kansas City and Atchison were doing, because we did it as a 3-city event. They all had, they had a contract person. Kansas City, Berkeley Park had a contract person come in and just coordinate everything, but all the community was involved. All of the, they were truly coordinators. They weren't, they got the community involved. And that's the only way it's gonna work.
Right.
And Atchison too, they actually have a person hired by the city that does it every year, the Amelia Earhart Festival.
Okay. Yeah, and that's always just very successful.
Well, and having that continuity, I think, is why, you start a year ahead to draw those vendors in, because you can't get them at the last minute.
Right.
Any other comments or questions, Commissioner Wilson, Commissioner Griswold?
No, I think it's a good concept.
Thank you, Mr. Tedder, and we'll hear more from you. When will we hear some more from you?
Sort of as you want. We'll provide periodic updates, probably through Taylor's weekly report or my CIM, on kind of how it's going, the approaches we're taking. Probably not until early next year will you start seeing a lot of work that's been going on.
Okay, great.
Upon request, of course. If you want to know what's
Yeah.
going on, let us know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is community appearance discussion. I think this is Commissioner Griswold's action item or discussion item.
Just pass this, it's a one-page memo. And since I asked for this particular study session, I have volunteered to be the facilitator. And this is just a one-page memo just to let you know how.
Oh, for John.
When we have these, I wish we could get these ahead of time, so we had a chance to
I'll
look
split
at them.
you.
Oh, you gave yours?
Yeah, I gave it a fresh.
There's not too much detail in this particular memorandum. I think Paul and I may have miscommunicated. I would have liked this to, but I didn't get it finished till Sunday, so that was one of the challenges. But so I have purpose for our study session today. That's pretty straightforward. Just want to have a discussion about the appearance and image of Leavenworth, Kansas. The method, I don't know, 30 to 45 minutes of dialogue. I guess it depends on how much detail we want to get into. I don't want to get bogged down in the details, but I just figure that in exchange of ideas, I'll introduce the subject like I'm doing now. I'll ask the city manager if he has any further perspective on what I introduce. And then I think each one of the commissioners should have a chance initially to voice their thoughts and views, and then we'll have a discussion about the items that we bring up. And then the end state is just that we've all had an opportunity as commissioners to express our thoughts, views, and ideas, including some potential solutions about the subject. And as we go along, the city managers capturing and writing some of the the essence of these discussions and thinking about what maybe could be some of the next steps, including whether we have a follow-on study session. Now, I do have my perspective on things, and there's a short paragraph there, and it's pretty straightforward in terms of that I think our appearance and image of Leavenworth is largely a product of what our citizens and visitors see and feel when they drive on city streets and look to the right and left at houses, apartments, business, and greenways, visit the downtown, walk along city sidewalks and 3 Mile Creek Trail, and visit and use our parks. I will say that I know that this commission and the 3 commissioners who've been on the commission for a long time, there's been a lot done from a macro standpoint in terms of projects, investments to improve the appearance and image of the city. Some of them at the front of that list, I think, are down at the intersection of 4th and Metropolitan, what was done down there with the property and the houses, and now the 2 hotels that are down there, the welcome sign. Then the other hotel, the Home 2 Suites, replacing the Ramada on Delaware Street, and now with the the B&B theaters coming in. Those things are big macro projects that you as commissioners and the other commissioners invested in. And those, I think that type of investment and those type of macro aspects of the appearance and image of the city will continue. My focus today is more to maybe get into some of the micro things in terms of what I see in terms of some things with respect to the signs in the city, whether they be street signs or safety signs, the litter and trash that that has gotten better, I think, but still is a challenge. And I do point to the mayor's $500 and the commission passing that littering fine. I'd sure like maybe to catch a few more violators, and then weeds, brush, overgrown trees, uncut grass. I think we can do a little bit better there. I know the code enforcement people are dealing with that, but there's always room for improvement there. Vandalism and graffiti in some of the parks on 3 Mile Creek Trail. And then we are, apparently the last 2 years, have been dealing with a larger list of unsafe, unhealthy, uninhabitable, and unsightly structures, and so that would continue, and maybe we can talk a little bit about making that list a little bit longer. But actions to implement improvements run the gamut, but that's the focus that I'd like to have today. The infrastructure, and particularly the roads, there's an aspect, obviously, of aesthetics and associated with that, but I think that's a topic for another time. In terms of just having good roads, and if we have good roads, obviously that contributes to the aesthetics and the image of the city. But I mean, we can get into that today, but that really wasn't my focus this evening during the study session. And the final thing is that we're not starting from ground zero. In the read ahead, Mr. Kramer pointed to the 2019 operating budget, the $10,000 dedicated to aesthetic improvements in city parks, $10K dedicated to replacing old, faded, and damaged city signs, $10K dedicated to clearing junk blight from court-authorized cases, which is really good, and $10,000 plus dedicated for wayfinding, signage in the downtown, and then finally $60,000 dedicated to funding a community development director. So those are all positive aspects of what we're dealing with. And so with Paul, anything to add to what I just laid out for our session?
No, Commissioner Griswold and I have been dialoguing on this for quite a little while now, and I was happy to see in his memo, independent of mine, we both included a lot of the stuff that we just did in the 2019 budget.
Right.
And a lot of that was from conversations we've had and conversations the commission has had on a whole, is what are these littler things that we can do that make a big impact? And you know, Commissioner Griswold hit on those important key items we've had. So these are just, I look as complementary things to continue that momentum. So we're happy to explore these sort of low cost, high impact things that we can do. Whether I tend to like for these small things, these small amounts, or contracting certain areas out rather than dedicating city staff to do that. It's much more expensive to bring another 2-person crew on to do a certain task than it is to, you know, let a $10,000 contract for maintenance of a certain area. So I was happy with how this turned out, and I think we're all on the same page, and certainly staff have had these conversations about ideas on what we can do, ways we can attack some of these smaller issues. One thing, the signs idea came from Mike McDonald. We only have one signs person, so when you say, you know, can we replace 500 more signs? I think no. But potentially we could contract that out, you know, at a $10,000 a year, so we could maybe double the amount of new signs we put out with not doubling the amount of staff that we have. So we've sort of changed our mindset a little bit in preparation of the 2019 operating budget to look at these smaller, easier wins based on the conversations that I've had with Commissioner Griswold and the commission as a whole. So that's all I would add.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that in addition to the work that the city manager and the commissioners have done, I mean, there have been a lot of other stakeholders in the community that have that work, businesses, volunteers, volunteer organizations, individual citizens. So it's any solution will be a multifaceted and multi-stakeholder solution. Mr. Mayor, any comments before?
I'm obviously completely in agreement with anything that we can do to improve the appearance or work on items that can improve it. I know that in the last approximately 10 years, I think we've taken down maybe 60 structures. I can't think what the exact number is, could probably come up with them, that we hadn't before. And these are the most egregious of the blighted structures that we've had in town. We've been somewhat handcuffed because we use federal funds for that for the most part. Community Development Block Grant, am I correct with that?
Yeah.
And we use federal funds. There are certain processes that you have to go through, which, you know, if we put somebody on the list in May, it sometimes could be almost January before that house is taken down because of that. We've now allocated some money in this year's budget that we don't have to go through the federal processes. Everybody will still have a due process, but we can move quicker. I've said it a couple times now that we're getting a lot of money in the transient guest tax, and it's kind of it's generic on how it can, not generic how it can be used, but it says can be used for, is it tourist type, how's the statute written now? It's kind of
Right, it's
vague.
just a two line in the state statute of tourism related expenses, and I did include in my read ahead packet that we are working on a charter ordinance that would allow the use of transient guest tax funds on a wider variety of uses, and potentially we could use those on some of these issues that you're talking about.
And I've always advocated for that. I don't want to spend it down to nothing. There's many good uses for it, but if we can use some of that money for blight improvement. The idea is a trash can on every corner downtown and maybe in high traffic areas. Obviously it takes people then to, you know, clean them up and things like that. You have crews going around. But using those transient guest tax, which in the amounts are growing, if we somehow we can creatively use that within the statute, and I know that Mr. Kramer and Mr. Waters, our city attorney, drafting that ordinance and seeing how far we can, I hate to use the word stretch, but legally use that money for things, to call it under quote, tourism-related activities.
To
And I
increase
think
tourists,
the visual appearance of a city is, in my opinion, tourism-related. So that'd be my interpretation. I'm not a judge or a legislator either, so those are my thoughts.
Mr. Wilson?
Well, the biggest one, of course, we all know the roads, but we're trying to work on the micro projects. Handicapped accessible sidewalks throughout the northern part of Leavenworth. I don't know if that could be considered a major project or, but of course, we all drive through the northern part of Leavenworth and some streets don't even have sidewalks.
Right.
And you catch a lot of wheelchairs driving in the middle of the street. So I think that's a big issue. Abandoned buildings, we discussed that we're going to be looking into that in the near future. And some citizens also was addressing the fact about street lights. They said some of the streets don't have street lights. And they said at one particular time a person had a house got broken into, and you know, the cameras, somebody had cameras, but there wasn't street lights, so therefore they couldn't see, you know, who was breaking inside of the house. So those were the top 3 things that was mentioned to me. So.
Good. Let me just ask Mr. Kramer real quickly. Streetlights that's a West Star issue.
West Star?
Mike
I'm
can
going
give
to
you
ask
the
Mr.
history
McDonald. We don't manage the streetlights. I think West Star does, but I know that you can tell us exactly how that works.
The city commission has adopted a policy of essentially 1 street light per intersection, with street lights not being further apart than 600 feet. This is back in the 70s or mid-80s. And that is managed by Westar through their street lighting program, which basically, if they don't incur any extraordinary expense, they will install lights as we request them to do. Some of the major streets have more lights than residential streets. The biggest problem we have with residential street lighting complaints is that there are big trees in the way of street lighting. And there was a project in northeast Leavenworth a number of years ago where we worked additional street lights in as part of a neighborhood improvement, some mid-block street lights. There was some limited tree clearing, I believe, that went on with that, but the trees have all bushed in and you can't see about 10 feet away from any street light in most of that area where we did that extra work.
Mike, what does it cost to add 1 street light?
I think it's about $50 per month forever.
Okay.
For the utility,
the
for
city.
the utility, but Westar pays for the installation
Right.
and the hardware.
Yeah, the city does not incur a direct expense. It's effectively a 3-year minimum commitment on the city's part if you ask them to put a light in somewhere. And then 2 weeks later you say, oh, sorry, we didn't mean that. They'll look at you funny and we'll talk about the 3-year rule.
Okay.
But they've been very good to work with. At $50 a month per light adds up very quickly.
Yeah, it does.
So the project you were talking about, did it include putting up a few new streetlights and cutting back the foliage or the?
It didn't cut back much. I think it was just enough to get the wires in that they could put to the new lights. And those were mid-block lights, a very similar discussion to some of the ideas I've heard here this evening. And you can't tell that it's there's mid-block lights. There's kind of a glow in the tree.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I do from time to time authorize a mid-block light. Every once in a while, we'll have a property that abuts a back of an apartment complex that is not well lit or something. So once or twice a year, we'll do that for specific cases. But to start putting mid-block lights everywhere gets real expensive real fast.
Okay.
Another thing is homeowners can also arrange to have a area light in their yard at their expense through Westar.
And what would be kind of the expense for?
Kind of the same thing, probably a little less, I believe, but it's the same basic program.
At $50 a month, that's like the max.
I don't
3-year
know.
commitment.
It'd be whatever the electricity cost is. Is that?
There's
Oh, it is.
there's a flat fee per light type, and there's a time commitment on that too. Most people don't bump into that. And
We've also worked with Better Lights that Westar has done, upgrading their lights. So some of these could be an issue of tree clearance or coverage. But I don't know that Westar's in the business of clearing
Yeah.
trees from around the lights.
Sometimes you go up to corners and the trees are so thick you can't see the street sign or the lights, that well.
I know Westar clears when it interrupts their power lines,
Yeah.
Yeah, they do that clearing. You see them every year through town, tree cleaning, clearing services around the wires, but probably not around the lights.
That's correct. They protect the transmission lines or the distribution lines. They're not clearing trees around individual lights.
Right.
Yeah, if you go out 20th and High near my house, that's what you can't even see the street. When you come up to it, you see a big tree there. You don't even see the street light or the
Yeah.
because it's all in the tree.
Is the tree on the private property
Yes.
owners?
Yes. Mhm.
Mr. Dedeke?
I've
I
been
didn't think
sitting here
Jermaine was
thinking,
Were you finished?
Oh, I'm sorry, were you finished?
What,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't think he was finished.
Oh, I didn't.
so could we possibly look at it, look at some streets? If I send you some streets, we could possibly look at it, maybe doing 1, 2 a year if it's necessary.
Yeah, usually, because we don't do mid-block lights, I would get with the police chief and I would say, is this an area where your officers also are having issues?
Okay.
Because I don't wanna say it's not good enough for it not to be well lit, it also has to be in an area that is really poorly lit or really bad coverage
Yeah,
or
yeah, I
something
got
like
you.
that. But sure, yeah, we'll look at any location.
Jermaine, anything else?
We're good to go, bro.
Sorry. I guess I'm not facilitating very well.
oh, you're doing fine. I agree with your list, Mike. But just so everybody knows, I'm gonna make the comment that Leavenworth hasn't been in the dust for the last 40 years or 50 years.
All right, I agree.
If anybody can recall, and I can, Mark will be able to, Nancy, what Leavenworth looked like 30 years ago. What it looked like to come across that bridge.
Sure.
What it looked like downtown.
Yeah.
Everything that we had. So taking all that into sense, and 4th Street with all the shotgun houses that Urban Renewals bought out, we've made a lot of
I agree. Progress.
progress.
Yep.
And a lot of that was urban renewal. So that's one reason we could do it. Leavenworth, as you know, is what, roughly 45% tax abatements. So if we was getting that, I'm sure we'd see much more done here. So I think, as a rule of thumb, we're doing about what we can do. I'm not saying that we can't do more. I mean, we've got city trucks running up and down the streets doing various jobs. And if there's a pothole there and that's not on their list, they drive around it. When you come into a stop sign and you've got brush and tree limbs hanging down where it hits the top of your vehicle and they just keep on going, I don't see, and this is not all the city employees, it's just some that I've been behind, they just keep on going. We need to get a note of this, because the citizens are not gonna call this in. And get the brush properly cut. If it's private property, then get code enforcement on it. I know out on 10th Avenue, we've always had a problem. But, you know, we've got a lot of low-hanging branches, especially on 2nd and 5th and Elm and Lynn. You run through there, they're gonna bottom out on the top of your car. So there's a lot of small things like that one can do that the citizen is gonna notice, I think, before, you know, anything else that you did that's more visible, but.
No, but I think that, I mean, that was part of what I tried to convey. I mean, I would agree. And yeah, I agree that there's been a lot of things, like I said, done at the macro level, some muscle movements that even go back, you know, further than 7 or 8 years. And obviously, I haven't been here as long as you, Mr. Dedeke, but I appreciate that. And I think we, in terms of the things that I'm thinking about, I don't think that I mean, everything costs money, but we're not talking major projects or anything like that.
Right.
A lot of it's attention to detail and prioritization and things like that. But
I concur with the basics of your list, so.
okay, thank you.
I have a few thoughts. When I was working in community development, Northeast Leavenworth Community Development, I went to visit the Argentine area of Kansas City, run by the Unified Government, and they took the tack that they improved the neighborhoods by adding streetlights, by putting in more sidewalks. And immediately, people started keeping their houses better. But one thing that I see around Leavenworth, especially when I do my home visits, you know, for the Prestige Home Care, is that there are a lot of elderly people that live in our older homes, and they cannot keep the trees from growing up, because our trees just take over. Trees take over, they just take over the house, take over everything.
Right.
And I just wondered, I mean, we have community development block grant funds that help fix the houses and stuff. Could some of that or something like that be done for low income or elderly to, you know, cut down trees next to houses and fix that up? Because that would protect their property as well as make the place look better.
I had that on my list too.
Did you? You're so smart.
But that's good. Any programs that can help assist the senior citizens?
Well,
Yeah,
yes, so I did this community development block grant for a couple years, and one thing that it doesn't usually address is maintenance issues. It usually addresses a single violation, or a single issue, like an HVAC, a hole in the roof, a gutters, on these one-time grants, because a grant, even just to get your HVAC, you gotta get quotes. I mean, it's a big process. So to have something that was more maintenance related, and then if you get funds once, you're ineligible for 5 more years as a way to sort of allow everybody to have their opportunity. So maintenance related items are tough, because you clear it all one spring, and then the next spring it's just as bad.
yeah.
So that would be the trouble with a maintenance related thing that we would have.
Well, and I used to help people file for these funds to fix their houses up, and I think something in addition to anything that we would do would be a community public information campaign. In addition to our annual cleanup, which is really good, we have a lot of organizations that get involved in that, and I used to call the Methodist Men's Group. There's other groups around town who would actually help build ramps. They would help do things like that, like cut trees and clean up yards and so forth. And so if there was a PI campaign where they could have a public clearinghouse, this organization or that organization would help you do that, and it just...
Yeah, I think most of the commissioners will remember as early as maybe 5 years ago, in coordination with the spring cleanup, you could call the Council on Aging, and they would coordinate. These volunteer groups who had a certain grid would also clean up yards within that for members of Council on Aging. Here's why it stopped. Members who had grids were going to $250,000 houses for the resident who had signed up to have their yard cleaned, and they didn't feel like it was a valuable use of their time. They'd do 50 bags of leaves on a house that looked like it obviously could pay for that service, and that happened over and over. So, but the Council on Aging was great with that, and that was a popular service. They would call and sign up with a core of volunteers who were happy to do that, but the volunteers soured when they felt like their goodwill was being taxed a little bit too much.
Yeah, and one other...
Maybe working with the Council on Aging on a new plan, some sort of elderly yard maintenance from a group of volunteers.
Yeah, there should be
some
rules on that,
right?
Like what you can and can't do.
The financing in there.
But another thing would be like kind of like a neighborhood watch. Well, I mean, when you have a house that you keep up and you've got one next door that doesn't, I don't know how you would do that, but have some sort of a neighborhood group that helps people clean up their houses. I'm talking about the elderly and low income, and just help organize something like that. That would just be PR stuff and community stuff. Wouldn't cost anything really. Just the organization. That's all I have.
Yeah,
I'd like to just add on to what Commissioner Bowder is saying, and I completely agree. A public information plan could help. I'm not here, government cannot solve all these problems, guarantee that, but we can maybe put something in place. We need a lot of community involvement. Things that come to mind right away are, of course, the ROTC cadets at the high school. They have many requirements for community involvement of getting 40 hours or whatever it might be of community involvement for certain promotions, certain merits. Boy Scout groups, I know Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are not as prevalent as they once were 20, 30 years ago, but they're still are active, and they are always looking for community projects. Somehow involving the communities, these local organizations, whether it be men's clubs, women's clubs, Lions clubs, Rotary clubs, etc., church groups, to do that. I think if you look at success in many small towns in Middle America, and I think you tend to see this more in Middle America and more in the the northern Midwestern states, in the Minnesotas, the Wisconsins, Iowas, small towns are very clean and everybody gets involved. If we in the city can get more people involved, more groups involved, I think it'll do an immense job. But we as the government cannot solve every one of them, but we can put we can encourage it, as Commissioner Bowder said, a public information campaign, and just try and get people to clamor to our door and say, what can we do to help? A small group, whether it be 4 or 5 people or a group of 20, whatever it might be. I think it's a great idea.
And along those lines, Mr. Mayor, I just passed out, because Steve Grant in his Parks and Recreation Department does have a program for our parks and other kind of public areas, some of our parkways and arborways and trafficways, where taking care of that particular park, or the parkway or the trafficway, we have certain volunteer organizations within the city of Leavenworth that have signed up for that. And there's still a lot of potential areas available, so I think I would reinforce what you just said in terms of maybe trying to reach out and getting a little bit more participation. I recognize that many of these volunteer organizations go above and beyond, and I wouldn't want to go over a line in terms of taking advantage of, because they have lives, business, making, they've got lives too, but there are some potential areas available that are listed on this particular chart that maybe we could, as part of a public information campaign, try to get more volunteer organizations to support these areas that aren't covered within the city. And I did, the spring cleanup is a great program, and the city looks really fantastic, at least for a few, several weeks after that. But we know certain areas that, after a month or 2 months, you see the litter and the trash in areas that were picked up and a lot of work was done. Melissa Bauer did tell me, though, I think the city's divided into 52 grids or something like that, and approximately half, or 40%, weren't covered this year. So that would once again be part of maybe we could get more of them covered next year in terms of the spring cleanup campaign. But that would all have to be part of reaching out to the public and our citizens to try to get better coverage. I think one of the litter and now since I was talking about litter and trash, I think it is a problem. I mean, the city looks great after the spring cleanup, but it's just keeping up with it. Actually, I don't know whether I think it's been looking better than maybe a year or 2 years ago. But you see it along certain areas, some of our main 10th Avenue on I think it's 5 Mile Creek that goes, and you see along the tree line and things like that. In our 3 Mile Creek, you see the trash and things like that. So so how do you deal with that? I don't know. We don't have anybody from the city picking up from some of these arteries or roads that I'm talking about, do we? I mean, it does seem to get picked up, but I'm not sure how that eventually.
Yeah, most of that would be a code enforcement violation. We get a lot of those, and we would send it to the adjoining property owner. The city would not go. If you're talking about like the Wellington area, it's the adjacent property. You'd hope the homeowners group would take care of a lot of that stuff. But we're parks, city parks is where we operate.
I know this is a little bit out of the box, but with respect to, I know that we talked several months ago about, I guess there was one ticket issued for a littering violation, but I don't know, cameras in terms of, I know this is out of the box, but maybe certain strategic locations within the city to catch more violators, because I think, if more violators were caught, it would be a deterrent. $500 is a lot of work. I
completely agree.
I throw that out as an out of the box solution. I hope it doesn't sound funny, but
no,
I agree.
truly believe, I mean,
Yeah.
my wife tells me that she walks 20th Street every morning with
Yeah.
a friend.
Yeah.
And I know that we can't stretch police officers this way, but if you had a civilian clothes police officer walking the street between 6:30 and 7:30, people are driving
Oh,
by, throwing
I know,
their
that's
Hardee's
right.
bags, McDonald's bags, just right out the window as they're walking along, you know, as they're
I don't
going
understand
at 45 miles an hour north to 45 north, wherever they might be going. And obviously, you need a police officer right there to
Right,
see it,
right.
and I don't think there's many people
No.
dumb enough to look in the rearview mirror, see a cop, and then throw their bag out the window, but.
There's certain places that it seems to take
Yeah,
place more than
20th Street,
others.
I know,
Yeah.
it's very evident, but there's plenty of other places.
Yeah,
Go down
the
Lecompton,
intersection
Illinois.
of 10th and Spruce seems
Oh,
to
yeah.
be.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think it's
yes.
people, it's a personal pride thing.
Yeah.
It's very, very disappointing, and it's reality, but I agree with you, if more and more people get stung with that.
Yeah,
I think they'd think a
it
little
would-
bit more,
right.
I'll wait until I hit a trash can.
You know, and I went to, that bridge over Limit, you know, over I think it's over 5 Mile Creek. That's a beautiful bridge, and I think it was put in, 4 or 5 years ago?
Which one,
It's the one by
About Fire Station 3.
by Fire Station
Okay,
3.
yeah.
But I was down there 2 weeks ago, and I just happened to look, and there was the trash and the litter on this beautiful bridge, and on the grass to the west of the bridge. And so I went by in a week ago, and it was still there. And then today we went to the guidance center, and it's still there. That's just an example of, I mean, if it's there for a few days or a week, okay, but it doesn't give a good appearance and is not supportive of the image that we want to have for the city if it's there for 3 or 4 weeks. I just bring that up as an example
Right.
for really a very nice piece of roadway that to me is spoiled by. I know you can't. That might be a place to put a to put a camera, but that's just a for instance that I wanted to use as an example. In terms of the street signs, I think we may have a way forward on that. And I happen to look, and there's just a lot of street signs that are either bent or in a state of disrepair or worn, and I think that's going to take a while. We have to get an inventory of all those. I may be willing to do that. Seriously.
My old Wrap with Love sign that the signs that I made back in the 80s is still, one of them's still out there by CVS, and it's like somebody had, when I first put it, somebody wrapped it around the pole, and then they straightened it out, and it's still been there ever since.
Is
all
it
of the
straight?
years.
I mean, it's good if
And
it's
I
straight.
sit there- No, it just looks
Sprinkled.
bad, it's really
Sprinkled.
old, I mean, it's just
I don't know.
sprinkled.
I see those things, and it may be a little thing, but I think that it would just be one of those little things that if we could make a little more progress on that within the city, I believe it would make a difference. And I may even be willing to go around, take a laptop, and, because I already have a list. I haven't sent it in to Paul yet. He told me to send it in. I'm not going to send it in yet. But, and I've noticed that there has been some, on some of the ones I was going to send in, like 17th and Vilas. That sign was and somebody from the city must have fixed it.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, we're constantly, we
Yeah.
have one
I
person.
see city
Yeah.
workers out there.
So
doing
so that one I drive by almost every day. But and then there's some of the the safety signs that are like on Metropolitan that are kind of crooked, and that's kind of a first impression when people come into the city or are leaving the city. But
How many stop signs did we do this year?
About 300, I think.
really,
Redid new one.
Yeah.
that's good.
Right, we had done an inventory of signs, which I'm not sure what level of street name signs we were
Yeah.
inventorying. We were focusing on regulatory signs. We identified this large percentage, I don't recall what it was, of stop signs that were too faded to meet the current regulations. So I don't like to know things like that without doing something about it.
Right.
So we proceeded to do an aggressive stop sign replacement program, and I think they're 3/4 of the way through the list at this point.
I remember you mentioned
And that was through the GIS, where they've inventoried all of the signs. You have to have a record of where they are and how much reflectivity they have and that sort of thing. But there are thousands of signs citywide between name
Yes.
signs, no parking signs, no left turn signs, all
Right,
those signs.
there are a lot of
Thousands
signs, no
of
question about it.
And we, this commission, I know Commissioner Dedeke and I, probably 5-6 years ago, we did a complete review of all the stoplights in town, and how many did we excise? At least 10 different intersections, if not 12, and 3 or 4 lights. Yeah, you can think like Grand and Spruce, which is just one block west of 10th Avenue in Spruce, there's a stoplight.
That's interesting.
At 6th Avenue in Spruce, as you're going east or west
good.
on that, and 4th and Elm, and just, I don't know how many we took out.
That's
We
good.
just and they were always there, and we never questioned, and we started questioning why have that. Of course, that then adds to your sign requirements, and,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that program worked really well. It was about 8 or 10 signalized intersections were
Yeah.
removed on that.
and then you're adding
There's still
4
50
stop
of
signs.
them.
Yeah. You still have some other ones?
Yeah, still 50 signalized
Yeah,
intersections
but,
in town, so.
There were 60 before, and some of them were thinking, why is this one here?
This doesn't bother me, I've had some citizens talk to me about the synchronization of lights on 4th Street, the downtown. Are they synchronized, or what? I just wanna kinda know what the deal is.
The theory, they're too close together to synchronize.
Okay.
So the theory is they're all supposed to be doing the same thing at the same time.
Okay.
For some reason, the clocks get a little separate, and so some of them will be running a second or 2 or 3 behind
Okay.
the other two. And then you've got to have somebody go down there and push the reset button. We're still trying to figure out what the problem is. And that's typical on those close intersections. They're all independently controlled, they've all got a super duper clock, and they're all supposed to do the same thing at the same time.
Yeah.
And if it's long enough to drive through comfortably, you get complaints about you can't drive across 4th Street, you gotta wait an hour for the traffic signal to change.
Yeah, I just thought I'd bring it up. How about, not so much the downtown, but although there are obviously businesses downtown, but the businesses that have, not in downtown, but also elsewhere in Leavenworth in terms of their parking lots and the areas external. I know that we probably don't have very much leverage, but it really depends on the business in terms of the litter that's in the parking lot, or cigarette butts and things like that, or the condition of the roads coming into the building or facility. So I just wanted to talk about that in terms of how they could be incentivized to maybe take a little bit better care of some of the external areas.
And also there was some issues, I guess, the business owners, when they set their trash outside, in the alleyways, and they said it just gets destroyed. I don't know if there's any solutions on how to prevent it. I don't even know if there's any dumpsters in the alleyways. I don't know.
Well,
I've just heard
if
this
it's a
complaint.
public pickup of trash, you're not supposed to put it out greater than 24 hours. If your trash pickup day is Thursday morning, you can't put it out until Wednesday morning. 24 hours before, that's the max. Most people probably put it out Wednesday night or early Thursday morning. So I don't know if that's the issue.
Oh, you're talking about the dumpsters though?
You're talking
Yeah, I
about,
don't know if there's dumpsters in the alleyway
Okay.
where they can throw them. I guess they set them out.
well,
They
that
said
would
people just
be,
been-
if there's dumpsters, those would be privately, the city doesn't provide dumpsters. That would be definitely if somebody has a private trash service. But I think some of the things you're talking about there, Commissioner Griswold, would that not be covered under code enforcement? If not cigarette butts in somebody's driveway at a business, but I mean, if it's
But I'm talking-
like
I'm
slop can, well, name the business. Which one are you talking about?
Oh, just some of the convenience stores in terms of the condition of the parking lots with with the trash and it's the customers obviously,
Yeah.
and the cigarette butts and things like that. I'm just making a
Yeah.
generic thing. And I don't know what what leverage we have. One thing could be, once again, thinking outside the box a little bit, is to have some type of quarterly competition in terms of best business
Yeah.
with respect to their the external appearance and image of their business. Once again, just another thing that I've thought about, but I mean, because the city manager has told me, because I've gotten some feedback from citizens on, like, the road that goes through, the old plaza. Yeah, I know the street. But as you get further down there towards, what is that, Muncie Road, I think? No,
You mean
I don't-
Hughes Road?
Hughes Road.
Yeah.
During the winter, at least during the winter, I haven't been there in a while, there's a lot of potholes and things like that. But that is the responsibility of the property owner that owns that
Yeah, it
road,
was
correct?
actually not a public street, it's
Right.
a private
Yeah.
street.
So-
private subdivision, yeah.
I don't know, moral suasion, I don't know how you deal with that. I mean, there's other instances of that, but, I mean.
Maybe a discussion with the chamber, because I know
I was
up until
thinking
just a
same
few
thing,
years
chamber.
ago, they used to give out yard awards.
Yard
things
awards.
for
Exactly.
public. I don't think they do that anymore, but maybe instead of the yard
Right.
awards to
Yeah.
residences,
Right, to the
business,
yeah, I see.
They
business
did, yeah,
awards.
they did
That's what I was
business
thinking.
yard awards too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
I think if it's not overdone and it's relatively simple and straightforward and you don't go overboard, I think those type of programs can be effective. But you know, the road thing, we said we weren't gonna talk about roads, but I did hear some feedback from some citizens about that particular road. But that, you know, that's,
Well, it's been fixed.
has it, okay, good, okay, that's good. Like I said, I haven't been
Idaho,
there.
or which road's been fixed? Hughes?
Hughes Road.
I was talking about the one that goes through.
Through the plaza?
Yeah, through the
Goes
plaza.
east and west?
Yeah, it goes, yeah, east and west,
East
right,
and
right,
west,
right.
comes through that.
Before
That's
it
our
jumps out
private.
onto Hughes
Private.
is what it-
Jumps at it, but I wasn't talking Hughes, I was talking the road that the whoever owns that
Oh,
property.
but that's private, that's
Yeah.
private road, that's not.
It's not a city road.
So I don't know.
And so, I mean, when you go into Ace Hardware, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
you know, that's only business.
But there's other examples of
Yeah.
that, where, you know, you have business owners or property owners that the city's not responsible for maintaining that road, but I mean, people don't make that distinction when they're driving on it,
Yeah,
in
of
a
course.
pothole, so.
Understand.
So I don't know, you know, what can be done there, other than, and part of it would be the public information campaign or the strategic communication campaign in terms of, just letting the community know, you know, that what the priorities or what emphasis that we have that we would like to emphasize with respect to the appearance and the image and the quality of life within the city, and try to use that to get people just to, you know, do what's right with respect to the appearance, and particularly the appearance of their property, whether it be a business or, you know, a homeowner residential property.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Hey, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Steve Grant, for responding quickly. There was gang graffiti on the northern
Yeah.
part of Leavenworth at that park, and he responded very quickly, and I haven't heard anything about needles being left at the park. So I just wanted to commend you. I don't know if you guys have been patrolling a lot more, but I haven't heard any complaints, but great job.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing about some maybe strategically placed cameras, is trying to deter graffiti and vandalism, which, you know, Steve is on it, but I mean, when it happens, and it's
Yeah,
usually there's always a cost to the city, and not only people and money, but time, and so I don't know if there's anything else we can do with respect to, other than maybe some strategically placed cameras at some of our, you know,
Yeah, I'm in
more
favor of the cameras.
like Doherty Park or Cody Park. I don't know. Once again, something to consider. I'm not saying it has to be done, but there is a fair amount of time dealing with, and then the graffiti down on 3 Mile Creek walk,
Yeah.
which periodically is a problem, and that is a beautiful walk. I don't know if it's as much of a problem as it, you know, has been maybe in years past, but you know, that's another area that you
All
do see.
those things end up being like issues at the pool or anywhere else. They're really cyclical. It really has to, you know, a specific group of kids or a specific
Yeah.
group of people, and then you'll be quiet for a year or two, and then you'll have a really bad graffiti year. And Steve can talk about that. Bathrooms being trashed one year, and then they're fine for 2 years. So a lot of that stuff kind of just does.
And then, we're not talking about it, but I think at some point in the future, we're gonna have a discussion about a rental inspection program, right? Which I think would contribute to an upgrade of the overall, depending on what we decide, but the upgrade of the overall quality of rental properties within the city. But, you know, tonight's not the night to get into any of those specifics. And then just the code enforcement program continuing to do what they're doing, and I do, in terms of some of the unoccupied facilities downtown, you know, when Wendy came and briefed us, it's normally around 92 or 93% occupancy rate, so 6 to 7% of the structures down there aren't occupied. I don't know, I mean, I talk about Lee's Furniture, and I know that there's some renovation going on, and I think the owner may be trying to sell it, hopefully, but the renovations have been going on so long. You've got a couple of plywood window, you know, big pieces of plywood in there, the ripped, I guess it's, on the windows, what is it, like plastic, you know, plastic, that's right. It just doesn't make a good impression, so I don't know.
Looks a lot better than it did before.
Well,
Still half finished.
yeah, it's like half finished,
but it's still looks
so,
better than it did
yeah,
before.
so I don't know, that may be something we wanna consider in terms of, cause there's probably not any type of ordinance that says there's any type of time limit, but, I mean.
No, actually, there is, and
Yeah.
been a little bit in my craw a few times too. If you, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Kramer, but I know if you pull a building permit, and say I'm gonna do something in my house, I'm gonna re-site it or something.
Right, right.
I pull that permit on January 1st, I've got till January 1st of the next year to do something. But if I put in one brick on December 31st, I've got another year. So I could, literally, if I had to put in 100 bricks on the side of my house and I get a building permit, I could take 100 years and not be in violation of the building permit. And there have been houses in our neighborhoods that have been that, and we were kind of handcuffed, and I was thinking, you get a building permit, and I don't know if we changed it, that you have to have substantial action done within 6 months, and then you have to extend it if something hasn't been done. I don't know. Mr. McDonald, I'm sure you're well versed on this. Because I know we have discussed this, but I understand what you're saying, and I agree.
Right, it is long been a policy to err on the side of homeowners or people that are working on projects. If they're working on them, we have been instructed as staff in the past to not decide what reasonable progress is for somebody who we know nothing about their talents or resources if they are making progress. I'm not sure the single brick worked, but it's within the realm of possibility that has been discussed with some property owners that know how the rules are working. But we try to work with people that are pursuing their projects and give them the benefit of the doubt. If there's a change in that, I think you will probably bump up against a group of folks that feel that they are being picked on by the regulators. They're just trying to do their best to improve their property with the resources they have.
Could we at some point just see the ordinance just to read it? Is it an ordinance, or is it just kind of a word of mouth policy?
I think it's in the permit.
Revisit it in a minute.
It certainly, we can.
I mean, I don't want to be overly draconian or anything, but I do think there's, I don't know, a happy medium someplace. And, you know, both for residential homeowners and also for certain businesses downtown. And Lee's is a big building, so people, as they...
I know some of these buildings take millions to really fix up right, and you know, when the corner pharmacy was open for years, they had the wood on the windows there, you know, and that always looked bad.
Right.
But he talked about how much money he'd already spent on the building and how they really couldn't afford the really expensive windows to put in there, and anyway, they just never got put in. But
yeah, I just, like I said, I'm kind of in the middle of the road on that. Not to be overly draconian, but I think that, you know, it's a city for all the residents, and it does, if it goes on for years, I mean, it's just not something that is good for the appearance and the image of the city. So, but I had another point, but we're addressing it in terms of the you know, kind of the unhealthy, the unsightly, the structures, and I think we're making progress. I had mentioned to the city manager that I wouldn't mind seeing more structures on that particular list as we go forward. I think maybe, what did we start out with this year, 18 or 20 or something like that? But I mean, if the budget would allow, is to put maybe some more, because there's plenty more candidates that probably should go on that list. So that was one of my thoughts too.
It's usually a budget issue is
right.
Part of it, but now that we've added funds to it,
yeah.
We're not just using the community development block grants, we've added some more funds.
Right.
We can actually address more properties this year than we have in the past.
So I don't know, those are the things that I had on my mind. Any commissioners have any other input before we wrap this up? And like, I don't know, I've taken some notes, but Mr. City Manager, I mean, I don't know. We got to come back, I think, and not maybe take 30 or 45 minutes, but maybe revisit this, you know, not in the next couple of weeks or anything, but just come back and have another session to see, I don't know, where we are, what we, you know, maybe pursue certain things and not pursue other things. But just to follow up, I think this has been a good discussion.
It is.
And
needed.
I think we let our staff run with
do
what
absolutely.
they want.
Right.
What they want to
exactly.
bring back to us if they have some ideas too.
And you can see that we've
We
added
haven't heard from staff, we just heard
Right.
from us.
an extra $100,000 in the budget for 2019 to address some of these things.
Sure.
And next year in budget,
Right.
Yeah, we'll be halfway through the year, but we'll know what impact this has had, and budget times, we can determine, how to disperse funds, how to allocate, and maybe the decision of the commission will be next year, take out 100 to 200, 150, or cut it to 80, who knows? But those are all things that we have to sit back and evaluate. But I think all of us agree there's many things that can be done. So much of it is personal responsibility.
Right,
as we've all
that's
said,
true.
and somehow get people to take
Right.
pride in their properties is,
Right,
we can't legislate that, but,
right.
and I don't want to go on a shame campaign.
No.
But sometimes you feel like you should go online, but, hopefully it will happen. Anything else, Mr. Griswold?
No, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is the investment and cash management policy review.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Commission, I'll start on this and then turn over to our finance director. As part of the city commission goals, really stretching back to last year, but then into this year, we've had, finance director has had an initiative to update, review, edit, and then consolidate all of our financial management plans. We've done quite a few. Before you tonight are two more that were identified in the latest goal setting session, an investment policy and a grant management policy. So I'll let our finance director go over those. Commissioner Griswold had asked me a question about the city's current investments, so I'll get with the finance director tomorrow and we'll get a list of what our current investments are, just for your information, and send that out to you so you sort of have an idea of where we are with our investments. But I'll turn it over to Ruby, and if you could just talk about the policy and what they do.
Okay, we'll start with the investment policy. Both of these policies are related to our the treasury management portion of our responsibilities. And the purpose behind the investment policy is to maximize our resources while still ensuring the safety of taxpayers' money. This policy prioritizes the objectives of city investments, which are in order safety, liquidity, and yield. So we always look for, while we want to invest our money, we want to do so safely, and I say our money, it's taxpayers' money, but we want to do so safely, and we want to do so in a manner that allows us to have money available when we have large outlays, such as bond payments and things like that. The policy also identifies and establishes the type of investments that this city is allowed to have. Those are governed by Kansas statutes, and the types of investments that we are allowed to invest in are listed on page 3 of the policy. The ones that are most common that we use are U.S. Treasury instruments such as Treasury bills, certificates of deposits, repurchase agreements, and savings deposits. In addition to determining what type of investments to use, it also provides guidance on when we use it and what type of collateral we have to require for the investments. And we do perform a cash analysis to determine what outlays we have coming up so that we can know how much is available to be invested. Do you have any questions on the investment policy before I move on to?
One thing I'd point out is all these policies are largely based, one, on Kansas statute, if any is applied, but then also GFOA, the Government Finance Accounting Association. So all these are best practices. And these are also, I want to point out that this isn't stuff we haven't been doing for a long time and following, but this whole process that we've been going through over 2 years now is to just fine tune our policies and then consolidate them into one new plan.
Let's say that you got $500,000 that you want to invest short term or mid, whatever length of time. Who makes the decision whether you buy a CD or a T-bill?
What we do is identify how much money we have available, and then we look at what the Kansas Municipal Pool says we should be receiving as a return on investment, and then we contact local banks and ask them what interest rates they're paying on certain types of instruments. And a lot of times it's strictly based on the amount of time that we're investing money, but it also depends on what type of investment. So recently, we had an amount of money that we wanted to invest for 3 months and an amount of money that we wanted to invest for 6 months. We don't ever exceed 2 years, but we looked at the interest rates that were available, and for the 3 month when we ended up investing in T-bills because the interest rate was higher, on the 6 month we ended up investing in CDs because the interest rate was higher.
Good. Good. And obviously, when you go into a CD or a T-bill with a finite time, a 90-day or 180-day, if something happens on a 180-day T-bill or CD, in 120 days you need the money, you can't get, or you get it, but you get a severe penalty, you lose money doing it.
Right.
Have we ever been caught short like that we overextended our investments, you know?
No, not since I've been here, and I doubt that, based on conversations I've had with Karen, she's the person who really manages the treasure, does the treasure management portion. I don't think that they've had that situation arise, but we have an intermediate a type of savings account, a repo account, that we keep a certain amount of money in. So we look at what our cash requirements are in the short term, and we keep that amount and a little bit more than that actually in our checking account. Then, once it gets over a certain amount, we move that money to a repo account because the interest rate's higher than that.
Sure.
And once that amount gets to a certain point, that's when we invest in other types of investments.
So, what you're saying, we invest in very conservative
Yes.
investments, we're not buying Bitcoin or
Oh, no.
pork bellies or anything like that.
No, I like my freedom.
You and the Russians, right? Us and the Russians.
Were there any other questions? Okay. And most of our investments do, once you have a certain dollar amount, there are collateral requirements that the banks provide. If it exceeds FDIC limits, then we do require that the banks or the Treasury Department provides collateralization. So on the cash management policy, essentially it identifies the types of procedures we need to have in place to have effective cash management, and it addresses the types of things for segregation of duties so that no one person has total control over certain things. It addresses types of things that would come up during an audit, like the timeliness of depositing and recording the transactions, the use of pre-numbered receipts, timeliness and need for bank reconciliations, the number of signatories we would have on disbursements, and the types of methods of payments that we have. So it's really just defining what types of transactions we're going to have and how we're going to conduct those transactions.
This is on the cash management?
Yes.
So how many people, how many employees in the city handle cash? I mean, do you know the exact number or approximately?
I don't know the exact number, but I know the locations. For example, the clerk's office,
Riverfront.
the Riverfront Community Center, the court system. Some people at the service center, they might go and pick up trash bags or something like that.
Concession stands.
The concession stands.
Right.
And the admin for, animal control and pools and so.
There's probably at least 25 or 30 people that actually are.
I would say at least.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a feel for it. So that's why a policy like this is super important.
And it helps with consistency. And it also helps protect employees. A lot of times, I've had employees feel like they weren't being trusted because we had things in place, but really it protects them too, as much as it protects the city. So.
Right.
Yeah, it's good to see you have like separation of duties at each location.
Well written.
Yeah.
Yep.
If there's no questions, that'll take us, we've done 6, this would be 7 and 8, and then we have 3 more that you'll probably see, in the next couple months as Ruby goes through them, and then at some point, we'll present the consolidated financial policies and procedures to the commission for formal adoption of the whole document, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that covers our agenda items. I'll go with discussions among commissioners. Commissioner Babbitt?
I don't have anything
Commissioner
this evening.
Dennehy? Commissioner Griswold?
No.
Commissioner Wilson? Mr. Kramer?
I don't
What
have
did you say?
anything.
I'm sorry.
So I just want some chicken.
That sounds good.
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, well, then we are adjourned.
Some chicken.